Do you struggle to work out the SQL to get the result that you need? It's a hard thing to do. In this video, I'll share my 5-step process that you can apply to simple and complex queries. If you've ever stared at a blank SQL editor thinking, I know what I want, but I have no idea how to write it, you're not alone. This happens to me quite often. Most people struggle to think through the problem before writing the SQL to get the data they need. So let me walk you through a 5-step process that will help you translate any business requirement into a clear, effective SQL query. You can get a PDF of this entire process at the link in the description. Before you even start writing your select query, you need to know what the business wants to understand from the data. The first thing is to ask them to explain or describe what they want. This may seem obvious, but sometimes they haven't done this. For example, if they want to see some data on the top customers, that might be clear to them, but to us it's not. What does it mean? Could they explain what they mean by top customers? Let's say they have clarified this and they want to see the top 5 customers by purchases. There are a few other questions you can ask. Find out what the expected output is. Do they want a list of customers only or some numbers along with it? Is it at a point in time or over a certain time period? Keep asking them why until you are clear what they want to know. For our example, let's say our business representative wants to show the top 5 customers by purchases in the last 3 months. This could be enough for us to start based on what we know about our database. Step 2 is to break down the logical steps to find out the answer. But instead of writing it in SQL, we write it in plain English. You can write it down in your SQL editor or a notepad or somewhere else. List down the logical steps you would need to take, one per line. Don't worry about the tables, syntax or functions yet. Let's see an example. Our requirement was to show the top 5 customers by purchases in the last 3 months. How do we break this down? Step 1, we would find the purchases in the last 3 months. Then we would group them by customer. Then we sum up the purchase amount. Then we sort the data by the total purchase amount. Finally, we limit this to the top 5 results. Now that we have these logical steps, it's easy to translate them into our database and SQL code. The third step is to relate these tables to your actual database schema. To do this, identify the tables and fields you might need. Where is the data that is needed for these steps? What table is it in? Which columns may be needed? Then you'll need to understand the relationships between the tables, which are the primary keys and foreign keys involved. If you're not sure, check the database. Use the Object Explorer to find out the column names and keys. Run some simple select star queries to see what the data looks like. Also, you can get a PDF file of this process as a reference. Check the link in the description. For example, our logical steps mentioned customers and purchases. Let's say that in our fictional database, the customer data is in a customer table, and the purchases are in a table called cust order. In the customer table, there is an ID field that we can use and a name field. In the cust order table, we have the order total field that stores the total of an order or a purchase, and the order date, which allows us to determine if an order was in the last 3 months. The cust order table has a customer ID that relates to our customer table. Now we can actually write some SQL. But don't go and write the entire query at once. Start small and build up to the larger final query. This will stop you getting overwhelmed and allow you to test as you go, making the entire process easier. Start with a simple select query for a couple of columns from a single table. Run the query to see if you get the result you wanted from this small query. For example, we could start with our first logical step, which was finding purchases in the last 3 months. We would do this by selecting a few columns from the cust order table. We would not add a where clause at this point. We will just run a simple select query to get what we need. Once it shows the columns we want, then we can filter on the result to only show orders in the last 3 months. In SQL Server, you can use the date add function. In other vendors, you can use similar functions to find the date 3 months in the past. We run this updated query and see the results, which we can quickly review. We should only see orders from the last 3 months. Then our next step was to group by customer. In our example, we would add a group by clause to group the orders by customer. When we have a group by clause, we often have aggregate functions. We wanted to see total of orders, so we can add a sum function to sum the order total query. Now we would run our query and see the results. We should see each customer ID and the total of their orders. At this point, you can check some of the customers against the raw data from the customer order table in the previous query. We should get the numbers we expect. We repeat this with the rest of our steps until we get the result we want. The next logical step we identified was to sort the data by the total purchase amount. To do this, we add an order by clause and order by the sum function. We run this and we would expect to see the results shown in order of the total amount from highest to lowest. Finally, we limit the results to 5 rows. We can do this either using the top keyword, the limit keyword, or the fetch first keyword, depending on the vendor. I'll use the fetch first 5 rows here, but they all work in a similar way. If we run this, we should see the top 5 customers. We don't see the customer's name because that's in our customer table. We can add this by joining to the customer table on these 2 columns. This should be our final query. It should give you the results you want. Building the query in stages will help you spot issues early and resolve them, which is way easier and faster than finding an issue with the final query and trying to fix the issue then. Once the query works and you have the right result, try to make it better. There are many ways you can do this. Can you add any common table expressions to improve the clarity? Can you filter earlier in the query to reduce the number of rows processed at different stages while still getting the correct result? Will other users understand this query? Can you add column aliases or table aliases to improve the readability? Also, add comments to the query to help other people and you in the future understand the query and the logic. You now have a solid process you can follow anytime you're stuck on a query, where you can go from the business requirement all the way to a working query. If you found this helpful, you'll love my course SQL Simplified. In the course, I'll show you how to go from a blank page to a confident SQL pro, with practical techniques, real examples, and step-by-step explanations. Check the link in the description to enroll and start writing SQL the easy way.